So when you're talking about innovation, innovation is not only creating but bringing into use new ideas. And in fact, the bringing into use is the hard part. We probably all have enough ideas in a week to last a lifetime. And what are we going to do? So many ideas, so little time. But the act of intrapreneuring is deciding that one of the things that you're pursuing is so important that you're really going to get committed to it and devote your time to actually making it happen. And then you build the team and you build the relationships with other people that make that happen. So creativity plus implementation means innovation. And I just want to be clear, because to some people, innovation is creativity, and I hope we use the words the same way, at least for the time I'm talking. So innovation gets in trouble because of the way we've all been taught. You set goals, you make plans, and you plan and you plan and you plan. And then finally you put the plan into action, and you hope that the variances are small, because that's how you tell a good manager everything comes out according to plan. Unfortunately, this has absolutely nothing to do with the way innovation actually happens. Innovation is a series of blundering moves in which you try something and it doesn't work, so you try something else and it doesn't work, and you try something else, but you keep going until you finally get it right. And this is one of the wonderful things that's happened since I began talking about intrapreneuring. We were always talking about iterative design, but iterative design is now really something that everybody has heard about now. And it's a huge move towards making innovation work. And the next question is, of course, what do we have to do to allow entrepreneurs the freedom which is necessary to do 8 iterations in a day, as the inventor of Google Glass did. That's not the way our organizations are generally set up. So we'll talk some more about that. So when I was first doing intrapreneuring, I asked, why is this not easy? And one of the reasons is the way corporations tend to analyze new ideas. And this is just a bunch of things: projected return on investment, what does the market research say, is it technically feasible, does it fit our strategy? These seem like good questions to me. But when I looked at them, I realized they were all about examining the idea. And what venture capitalists say, the people who are probably the best at managing entrepreneurs in this case, they said, I would rather have a Class A entrepreneur with a Class B idea than a Class A idea with a Class B entrepreneur. Who wants to do it, and what is their relationship to that idea, and what is the relationship of the people in the teams? These things are much more important than what the idea is. And that kind of makes sense when you realize that nothing turns out according to plan. Betting on a plan is a little bit like building a sandcastle below the high tide line and betting that it will be there tomorrow. The plan is not going to be there tomorrow. The entrepreneurial team is going to be there tomorrow, and so they're what you have to bet on. Well, of course, you don't want a Class C idea, but that's a different issue. So in large organizations, there tends to be a gap. There are jobs for people who invent things. There are jobs for people who come up with ideas. There are jobs for people who go out there and try to find out what customers want and so forth. There are jobs for planners. And there are jobs for growth managers of businesses and cash cow business managers and so forth. So at the very beginning, we're pretty well staffed. Towards the end, we're pretty well staffed. There's this big gap in the middle, which is covered by the entrepreneurial spirit, and without which you just don't ever get there. So an entrepreneur, an employee who takes on a role like an entrepreneur, or my favorite definition, the self-appointed general manager of a new idea. So what this is all about is intrinsic internal motivation, not extrinsic motivation. One of the reasons why bullying is not going to work very well in the innovation space, because you can't bully people into intrinsic motivation. Poor Dr. William Souter. 10 years he spent studying the life cycle of innovations in 53 different companies. And at the end, he was a disappointed man. He had thought that he could discover that there was a universal process to innovation, that wherever innovation was happening, the process was somehow in place. And then in the places, obviously, where it wasn't happening, it wasn't in place, but that then he would be the one who could reveal to the world the process of innovation that was going to work. And he came back and he said, I couldn't find anything in common with all the successful innovations other than the presence of a passionate entrepreneur who simply wouldn't stop. So this turns out that what we learned from the fact that innovation doesn't turn out according to plan, and actually from all kinds of empirical evidence, is that if we don't support our entrepreneurs, we don't get innovation. If we want innovation to move faster, we have to provide more support to entrepreneurs, and we have to supply it to the right people. So with that in mind, I want to tell you a little bit about the nature of the entrepreneur. Now, entrepreneurs are very much like entrepreneurs. In fact, they're often the same people, because if they get frustrated enough working inside a large company, they go out and become entrepreneurs and they succeed. And in fact, I used to I did innovation audits where we would look at what the culture for innovation was like. And one of my tools that I thought would be particularly useful would be to go and interview all those people who had left the company and formed very successful businesses on the outside. And in the end, I discovered that all their stories were identical and that there was no reason to do this anymore. And their stories went like this. I had an idea and they stomped on it. But I got clever and I hid the idea, but they found it and they stomped on it. And generally around, somewhere between 3 to 5 ideas being stomped on, they said, to hell with them, and I'm going to go off and I'm going to show them that they are stupid and that they should have backed my idea because I'm going to make it happen. And they go and they take big share away from their former employer, doing exactly the thing that they offered to do for the employer. And in fact, some of this is what has woken up some of the early companies who actually tried to do something about entrepreneuring, because they were looking at all the spin-outs and saying, wait a second, the spin-outs are 10 times the size of our company. Maybe we left something on the table here. So my mentor in entrepreneurship said that entrepreneurs are the dreamers who do. And what's important about this is that these are two things which we normally assume are not present in the same person. We have, our dreamers, and they've got their heads in the clouds and everything. And then we have the doers who are doing stuff but don't really have a very big perspective on what's going on. And that turns out not to be good enough to do innovation. Because a great percentage, probably 90% of all the dreaming that has to be done, is not destination dreaming, it's pathway dreaming. So the entrepreneur walks out 5 years into the future and imagines how great it's going to be when they've got this software running and they can see the kind of machines that would be necessary to run it, and they understand the security concerns that they'll have to deal with, and blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah, right? And they're just enjoying the hell out of this. But in order to actually get anywhere, they have to walk all the way back to the present. And when they get to the present, they have to look forward and see, well, where are the obstacles which are in the way of this? And that turns out to be one of the keys to how we make things happen, is actually detailed understanding of what's in the way and figuring out how to get around it. I'll return to this example in a moment. So this is Chuck House, an entrepreneur. When he was a young man, I don't have a picture of him as a young man. I apologize for that. The FAA requested a new monitor to go in the control room, and it had specs that nobody could meet. On the one hand, it had to be relatively short from these are CRTs, from the electron gun to the screen. And on the other hand, it had to be very, very fast. Now, the way you got very, very fast in those days was you used charge plates to deflect the beam. And you could get about a 15-degree bend in the beam, which meant that if the screen was here, for these big screens, the gun was going to be back here and it wouldn't fit in the control tower. So Chuck went around looking for solutions to this problem, and he found an electronic lens. So what he did is he put the lens in place and took the 15-degree bend that he was able to get with the charge plates and amplified that using a domed charge screen. So he had now, he thought, met the spec. But it turned out that there was another spec that got in his way. The electrons going through the grid had diffraction. And so the spot size on the screen was just a little bigger than the FAA required. And this was a fundamental rule of physics. You couldn't get around diffraction. And so the design was bad. And his boss was a nice guy. He said, gee, Chuck, that's too bad. That didn't work out. Why don't you go work on something else? We really appreciate what you did. I thought that was very clever. Not a bully, a good boss. And Chuck said, but wait a second, we've got something that can do things that nothing else can do. Maybe this wasn't the application for it. That's not the way we work at Hewlett-Packard. First, we have the customer demand something, and then we build it. We don't just go building things because we think they're a good idea. Chuck took vacation, shipped he was in Colorado at the time, shipped the monitor to California, took the front seat out of his Volkswagen Bug, and put the monitor where the seat was, and drove around to different companies in the Silicon Valley, bypassed the purchasing department and the front office and said, I just want to show you this thing. And he got back into the laboratory and began showing people what his screen could do. And he came back with 32 orders. And at this point, the marketing department had reviewed his design and said that nobody wants it. And they were right. The customers that Hewlett-Packard had then were oscilloscope customers, and oscilloscope people didn't want this. But other people, it turns out, could want it. Those of you who remember landing on the moon, those big monitors all around there were Chuck's monitors. And of course, this was a pretty cool thing at Hewlett-Packard to be involved in the landing on the moon. His team awarded him the Hewlett-Packard Award for Meritorious Defiance. And actually, this goes on to, I wrote about this in my book, and the PR department went crazy because he had actually been told by David Packard to stop working on it. And but what Packard actually said was, when I come back to this lab next year, I don't want to see this monitor in the lab. Good, said Chuck, we'll have it out of the lab and into manufacturing. Once again, you must imagine he had a pretty good boss to let him do that, right? Dar Howard was his name. But in any case, Packard comes back. He says, I thought I killed this thing. And Chuck says, no, sir, what you said is you didn't want to see it in the lab. And, sir, it is not in the lab. So a couple of years later, when I wrote my book, Chuck had managed to advance and was sitting up. He was actually head of engineering for Hewlett-Packard by this time. And the PR department got really mad about this and said, you're making a fool out of our chairman. You've got to do something about it. And Packard called him into his office. And he said, young man, he pointed his finger at him. He said, I want you to remember something. And Chuck was waiting for the axe to fall. And he said, there are a lot of people out there in this company with good ideas, and now you're in a position to kill them. I want you to think about that. And I think that it is true that most of us would admit that in the early days of the Silicon Revolution, that the Hewlett-Packard culture was spreading out through Silicon Valley and is what made this the great region, that there was a kind of understanding of what it was like to be an entrepreneurial person that made room for lots of people inside Hewlett-Packard. I know many think this is challenged today, and I won't take a position on that, but it certainly was a great run. When we see what is going on with entrepreneurs, it becomes important for us as managers to distinguish between the people who are really entrepreneurs and the people who are pretending to be entrepreneurs. Does that make sense? And so there are certain myths about entrepreneurs that we need to deal with. One is that entrepreneurs are driven by money. Entrepreneurs are high risk takers. Entrepreneurs are purely intuitive, and they're dishonest. And every one of these things is false. None of those are characteristics of entrepreneurs, but they are characteristics of a certain class of people which venture capitalists refer to as promoters. And promoters act like entrepreneurs, but they don't have the follow-through. Returning to this example, do I still have this example on the floor here? So you ask a promoter, you say, okay, you sat down, you've imagined the forward progress of the idea, you have found as a manager just looking at it that there are some obstacles in the future, and you say, what about this obstacle? And what you'll see in the promoter is a wonderful pirouette. They will go like this. It's so great out here at the end of the rainbow. How could you question this thing? Of course we want to do this. And that's at that point, you know that you're dealing with a promoter. Whereas, if you're dealing with a real entrepreneur, it's, oh yeah, well, we've been working on that one, and here's what we think. There's a pathway around to the right, but it might be blocked. The pathway around to the left is a little harder, but we could still get there. And if worst comes to worst, we can go over the top. But that'll be kind of expensive. I hope that doesn't happen. And what you know is that this person has thought a lot more about the obstacles than you're likely to come up with. And so you can trust them to actually move this thing forward because they are taking it all into account. Does that make sense? Entrepreneurs, it turns out, are not particularly motivated by money, less so than executives, for example. They are motivated by I don't mean to say that they don't care about money. We all care about money. Oh, look at that. Thank you. But they are driven by vision and values. And this is important to you as an entrepreneur and important to you as a manager. You have to find that the idea that the entrepreneurs are pursuing is not just grounded in the head. It has to be grounded in the heart, too. And if you find yourself in charge of an innovation project where your heart is not engaged, your job is to get out of there as fast as possible. Because the kind of behaviors that are required to succeed as an entrepreneur cannot be fueled by the kind of energy that comes from the cerebral cortex. You need the whole system involved, otherwise it's not going to work. And so that's, and you owe it not only to yourself, because you don't want to have a failure, but you owe it to the shareholders and to your boss and everyone else not to make a fool of everybody involved. So they're moderate risk takers. They choose challenging objectives and then try to do everything they can to figure out how to manage those risks. They're they're not just ignoring the risks. They're really paying attention to the risks. They are not purely intuitive. They are a combination of analytic and intuitive. I remember a party at the School for Entrepreneurs many years ago. And Ned Herman from GE came by, head of training at GE, famous guy. And he said, and it was one of those parties where we invited not only our students, but their spouses or significant others. And Ned said, I'll tell you who your students are. Well, you can't resist a party game of that kind. And he gave them a little test. And he took all the ones that were kind of the purely analytic types, and he put them in one pile. And then he took all the artistic types, and he put them in the same pile. Those were the spouses. And in the other pile, he put all the ones which were a balance of intuition and analysis. And those were the entrepreneurs. And he got our students 80% right. I didn't realize that as high a percentage as that actually were entrepreneurs that had come to our course, or that there was always the possibility that their spouses were entrepreneurs too. And by the way, we were 50-50 in gender, so there was no way he could have cheated on using that as a basis. And finally, entrepreneurs entrepreneurs in particular are honest rule benders. And this causes the bureaucrats to believe that they're dishonest because they're doing things that are not in the rule book, and they're not telling people about it necessarily. And we just have to put up with that, I think, if we want innovation, because people are going to, well, it is easier to ask for forgiveness than permission, right? The other two pieces of this, of course, are the very persistent, which is if you ask students of entrepreneurship what the single characteristic of entrepreneurs is, it's persistence, if you had to just pick one thing. And the other thing is what I call an internal compass. They're doing what they think is right, not what you think is right. And you have to learn to get along with that, too. It's really important because if they start doing what you think right, I'm putting you in the manager role. Now, I know you're also entrepreneurs out there, but if you're a manager and you start getting the entrepreneurs to do what you think is right, then you are the entrepreneur, which is a very time-consuming job, and therefore, basically, the idea is going to die because you can't actually do that. Another story. This is a story about Cheepak and Jeff Wiggin, both at T-Mobile, both graduates of my school. So Cheepak was frustrated by cell phone waste. He noticed, he was head of sustainability for T-Mobile, and he noticed all these cell phones going into the wastebasket and being shipped to China to be melted down. They were perfectly good. He said, why are we doing this? It doesn't make sense. And he put in for a refurbishing center. T-Mobile was fighting for bandwidth in those days. They had no money for anything other than buying bandwidth. And so building a refurbishing center, come on, get real. So nothing happened. And he was bemoaning this to Jeff, who was the CIO. And Jeff said, well, not quite sure what to do about this. But then he ran into a guy who wanted to start an insurance program. And the insurance program kept not penciling out. Maybe AT&T can afford to lose money on their insurance program, I don't know. But T-Mobile couldn't make it work by giving new phones to replace the broken phones. And Jeff said, maybe we can use the not broken, but turned in phones. And he found an outside refurbishing company, and then they built an insurance business. And so now they have $1 billion insurance business. And you might think, that's pretty good. That's a good entrepreneuring story, creating $1 billion business. Why not? But it doesn't end there. What happened was, well, what do we do with the extra refurbished phones? We have a lot more phones than we need to satisfy our insurance program. So Jeff, being one of the top 4 people in the company, was in a position to actually talk about overall company strategy. And they came up with a new phone plan. I think many of you are familiar with it. You sell the phone service for a flat fee for phone service, and then you can buy whatever kind of phone you want, and T-Mobile will give you 2 years to pay for it. At the end of that 2 years, your monthly payment drops if you haven't got a new phone because you're no longer buying the phone. But what happened to in the marketplace? T-Mobile was, at the time before this went into effect, was losing 500,000 customers a quarter. They went to gaining 2.3 million customers a quarter with this new plan. That's the difference between going out of business and being a force to be reckoned with in the industry. So what we see is a couple of interesting things. One, it takes people who care to get stuff done. And another issue, taking off my entrepreneuring hat for just a moment and putting on my sustainable business hat, it turns out that sustainability, building products that are good for the environment, that help to prevent climate change and all those sorts of things, is one of the best ways that you can get into the hearts of your employees. If you think about the millennials, they care about this stuff. They are imagining that some of these problems are actually going to affect them and their children, and they are not willing to work for a company that isn't giving them the opportunity to make a difference in the world according to the values that they have. And so here we see what started out as a nice thing to do in order to stop some kind of waste that was not good, ending up in transforming a company and actually saving it. T-Mobile would not be here otherwise. And I think that's something that to really think about. How do we find, if entrepreneurs can only succeed if their hearts are fully engaged, what values is it? Is it a 17% ROI for the shareholders? Is that going to get them out of bed in the morning? I don't think so. It's going to be something that is meaningful to them as whole human beings, because it's as whole human beings that you want your employees to come to work. Talk briefly about teams. I don't want to dwell on this because I've given you an instrument, and I urge you, if you're working in a team, to just try this instrument. It comes with some instructions, and it's not that hard to do. You just each rate it individually and then sit down and talk about it, and you will reveal a lot of stuff that's going on in your team. So I'll just mention a couple of things. One is, and I guess I led into this, an inspiring common purpose is what is the glue that holds a team together. If you don't have an inspiring common purpose, the chances are that you're going to get a real innovation team is not. Does that accord with your experience? I mean, when you think of successful innovations, didn't you have not just a passionate entrepreneur, a team of passionate entrepreneurs going after it? Entrepreneuring is not a solo sport. I'll flip down to 4 there. Clear roles in a team are important, but there's a dilemma here because the team members also have to have what is called fill, which is the ability to see things outside their role and recognize that there are things which nobody is doing, which are really essential to be done. And that's sort of at taking responsibility for the whole and staying in your role. You know, those things conflict with each other, and that's just a dilemma that you have to manage, and you have to realize that both of those things are important. Helicopter is a strange word. The Shell people use it to mean getting up high enough that you can see the whole system and being able to see what has to happen in the whole system, and important. Rapid learning from mistakes, we all know about that. 7, high-quality relationships actually turns out to be very important. And you've heard more about it today, but in the School for Intrapreneurs, where we spend maybe 6 weeks with teams of intrapreneurs, we can pretty much tell who's going to succeed and who's not. And it has to do with the kind of relationships that we see when people are sitting around in tables like this. If one person is doing all the talking, if 2 people think they ought to be the leader of the team and they haven't worked this out, if they haven't decided whether you're using consensus or autocracy, or better yet, something in between like conflict and commit, it's not going to work. And this is something to bear in mind when you're investing in, as I'm putting you in the manager role now, if you're investing in innovation groups, ask yourself the question, what are the team dynamics like? This is one of the best predictors of success that you can find. 4 ways to sell your idea. I'm now going basically to the intrapreneuring part of your personality, you as intrapreneur. How do we overcome the corporate immune system? Every organization has an immune system. The purpose of the immune system is to stomp out new ideas, and every organization needs an immune system. But as an entrepreneur, you have to learn to get around it. So the first one is asking for advice before resources. And let me give you an example. So I need your permission to move ahead, or you might be someone who would support me or whatever. And I come to you and I say, I got the greatest idea in the world. It's going to change everything. All I need is a head count of 6 and a couple of $1 million, and we can get right on this. Now, what's likely to happen in your case? Yes. Yes. And so if you're Michigan polite, you're going to say, let's send that to a committee. But what you really meant was no, right? So I go away, and you said no to my idea, and there's a couple of possibilities here. One was my idea was a really good idea, and you just failed to recognize it, in which case you are a bad manager. Or my idea is a really dumb idea, and you were smart enough to see that, in which case you were a good manager. Given that you know very little at this point about the quality of my idea, what do you suppose you use as your criterion for judging whether it's a good idea or not? Well, no, you've got a criteria. You want to be a good manager, not a bad manager. This is something you're pretty certain of. You want to be smart, not dumb. So because the only way for you to be smart is for my idea to be bad, I didn't really move my idea forward very much, right? I might be going backwards, right? Now let me try another approach. I've been thinking about this idea, and we've got the technology. I think it's probably going to work, but we're a little concerned about the marketing issue. And I was wondering if you know anyone over in marketing. You have a broader network than I do. If you know anyone in marketing that I could go talk to and maybe get some advice. Yeah. So you send me over here. Now, you've just spent some of the corporation's resources, right? So same logic applies. If my idea is a good idea, then you did a good job in spending corporate resources. If my idea is a bad idea, well then, not such a good use of corporate resources, right? So again, in this case, you choose what? What kind of idea do I have? What makes you a good manager? If my idea is good, right? Yeah. If my idea is good. So you already like me a little more, and I go over here. And Regina is a real marketing genius, and so we have some conversation, and she points out some things to me that I hadn't thought about, and I actually can do better if I take these things into account. And so, I'm moved forward on that basis, but watch what happens next. I go back, and I say, you know, that Regina, she's pretty sharp. She really helped. You know, I would have run smack into a wall if it wasn't for your advice. I really want to thank you. Now, it turns out that you haven't just done a little favor for me. You've done a big favor for me. And so now the idea is getting to be more your idea, even more than it was when you just gave the advice, right? This is really getting to be a good idea because of the fact that A, I'm checking it out with your people, and B, I have gratitude. Now, gratitude is such a powerful tool that if I am in a meeting every week, and Raj is the bad guy in this group. He's every week he's giving me a hard time. Whatever I say, my ideas are no good, and so forth. I really apologize. I don't believe that this is you. But anyway, so you hammer me on some point, and I go away and I check it out. And surprise, surprise, you were actually right about some of the things you said, and I actually did need to know about these things, and I did need to go do that research because, again, my idea has changed. So I come back and I say, Raj, you know, I must say, when you told me those things, I wasn't very happy about that. But I respect you, and I checked it out, and you were right about this and this, and I would have run smack into a wall if it hadn't been for you, and I want to thank you very much. It's not possible for you to hate me quite so much anymore. I may not have yet an ally, but I may have defused an enemy. Does that make sense? So gratitude is extraordinarily powerful. And if we keep this up, we'll be on the same team, right? So you have to let people contribute to your idea, and the more they contribute to it, the better the better your reception in the system is. And here's the really weird thing. They don't get to have a choice as to whether they contribute to your idea. You get to have the choice as to whether they contribute to your idea. And so this is a switch that has to take place in your head to realize that you are at cause, not at effect in this matter. Another, obviously, we need sponsors. One of the things I found is that if I could change only one thing in a company to move forward, it would be getting the middle managers to be effective sponsors. And if we could do that, we would basically have won the game. There are other things to do also that are helpful. And so we need to build a coalition of sponsors. And all the things which I just talked about are ways that you get sponsors on your side. You don't go and say, will you be my sponsor? You say, will you give me some advice? A little later, you might ask for a little bit more. I mean, you have to, the key here is always ask for things to which the answer is yes. Never ask for things to which the answer is no. And the easiest thing to be sure you'll get a yes to is advice, which is why you start there. So the next thing that you do to deal with the immune system is reframing. And Michael Phillips at the Bank of California wanted to launch something called certificates of deposit for consumers. It never happened before. And everybody was in his way. I mean, he had to go to the law library and do research and so forth. And he came back and he said, well, actually, this is legal. You were wrong about that. And regulation this and so forth. Probably didn't say you were wrong about it, but I discovered that. So you would never want to make anyone wrong. And then he issued the magic words that let you move through the system. What do you suppose those are? When you were a kid, the magic word was please, right? Your parents were so trying to get you to be polite that when you appended please to your request, it greatly upped the request. It's a possibility of succeed. But please doesn't work inside the corporation to quite the same degree, so you need more powerful words. And the powerful words are, this doesn't matter, it's only a test. Nothing good or bad is going to happen if you approve this. Nothing will change at all. Michael kind of abused that privilege, but that's another story. It's a wonderful story. But so the next one is a story about the NEC personal computer. So Watanabe-san became one of those computer hobbyists, and he decided that this is back in the homebrew club, and he was hoping that NEC would go into the business of making personal computers. And he struck out everywhere he went. He went from division to division. He couldn't get anywhere. Finally, his boss said, you know, you engineers are all the same. We give you a sales job, because he was supposed to be selling microprocessors, and nobody was buying them because nobody knew what to do with them. That's why he made the personal computer to begin with, to just have something to show that you could do something with a microprocessor. And his boss said, stop that with that computer and go out there and sell chips. So this was pretty much the end of the road for Watanabe-san, except he had one last thing that he could try. And I want to offer you this one last way to move on when things get really bad. He took the computer apart. He put it in a bag, along with instructions on how to reassemble it, took out a magic marker and wrote sales tool on the outside of the bag. And he went to his boss and he said, I finally got it, boss. I'm supposed to be selling things. And look, I've got this sales tool. Now, you say, why did his boss fall for this? And the answer is that the corporate immune system is very similar to the human immune system in the body. The human immune system responds to what are called cell surface antigens, little things that are stuck in the membrane of the cell, right? It has no idea what the DNA on the inside of the cell is. Similarly, the corporate immune system doesn't have time to ignore to figure out what your idea really is. They're just responding to the message on the outside of your idea. So, first of all, this suggests that you should be careful about what you put on the outside of your idea and really think it through, and go to your friends and say, who will get mad if I call it this, and find something that's innocuous enough so that it can sail along. But the second thing is, when all else fails, what you do is you rename and press on. And you can start the whole process over again by just continuing your project under a different name. I hope none of the managers in the room heard this. All right. Talk a little bit about sponsors. There are 5 roles in innovation. There's the climate makers who create the overall culture, the entrepreneurs, the teams, the inventors and idea people, and the sponsors. And the sponsors are one of those critical roles. And here's a few thoughts. They guide, they get resources for the entrepreneurs, they protect them, and so forth. And what you can do if you want to be a sponsor is you can say, hey, I'm really open to new ideas. Bring me your ideas. Well, the worst of this would be a suggestion program, because then you end up with 400 ideas and no idea what to do with them. But what you also get is ideas that are going off in all directions. And as a result of that, you have to say no to almost every idea that you get. Does that make sense? And so if you say no to 99 ideas, what are your employees going to consider your attitude is on actually implementing the idea of supporting innovation? They're going to conclude, even though you're coming from the best of intentions, that you didn't really mean it. So what you want to do is you want to tell people, these are the problems that are keeping me up at night. The entrepreneurs are pretty flexible. They'll hunt through their bag of wonderful ideas and find something that aligns with what you want to have happen, at least most of the time. And you'll have a much higher yield rate in which you can say yes a much higher percentage of the time, and things will go better. The next thing is asking for help. You can put out a broad vision, but if you act as if you have all the answers, people will just sit around and wait for instructions. You have to be vulnerable in order to get your people to innovate. You have to say, I think there's a pony over there, but I don't know how to get to it. And I hope you guys can come up with some interesting ideas that will move us towards this objective. And then people have been given the freedom to come up with ideas. They're actually supporting you, and you're actually getting ideas that are making a difference to the things you really care about. And not knowing what the answer is leaving room for other people. And this is very important, because you get to places by appearing to know everything in an organization, but the skill of being a manager of entrepreneurs requires not knowing. Bet on people, not plans. I think we've beaten that one enough. General Dorio founded the venture capital industry. One of his better investments was digital equipment, which he bought a large share of for $75,000. You must imagine that worked out pretty well. General Dorio when he said, when a team first comes to me, the first thing I do is knock them flat. This sounds like bullying. I don't know what to say about this. Maybe this was not a good thing. And he said, I watch to see how they pick themselves up off the floor. What was he testing for? Say again? Persistence, of course. He was testing for persistence. The next question he asked, are they laughing? Why was he asking this question? God, this is the smartest group I've ever been in. The first answer is the right answer. It is relationships. He was testing the quality of relationships within the team. If they're just a bunch of people with the right resumes, but they haven't really worked things out among them, they don't know what they can get away with and what they can't get away with, so they're all kind of careful with each other. But if they really have gone through the process of becoming real friends, they're laughing together. And this was his second criterion: persistence and teamwork. And so I just pass that on as kind of important. The sponsor lives in a dilemma. The need to guide and control, the need to give entrepreneurial freedom. And we've been told to ask questions. That's a big part of it. The waterline criterion is Bill Gore, who said, I found that if I just tell people, if you want to bore a hole above the waterline of the ship, just do it. If you want to bore a hole below the waterline of the ship where water will pour in if you make a mistake, come to me first. And he said what he determined was that that's enough information. And I think that's pretty interesting about humans. Now, one of the big skills of a manager of entrepreneurs is the ability to lower your status. If I come in here high status and say, oh, you're developing that new water bottle, I like cobalt blue, and then I walk away, what's going to happen to the water bottle? But what if the market research all showed that was the wrong answer? It's going to be cobalt blue anyway, because getting by the next approval session is necessary. But if I come here and sit down, or even better, I get down even lower, so that everyone's head is now higher than mine, does this change our relationship? This is hardwired into the human species. So what I've done is I've lowered my status. I could also fiddle with this thing and be a little twitchy. That would lower my status. There's lots of ways to lower your status. But you want to be in a situation as the manager of an entrepreneurial team where you are the peer who is the expert in politics and resources. And you assume that other people are expert in market research and technology and so forth. And it's pretty easy to see that I am not trying to dominate you right now, right? Even though I have the microphone, which is, after all, a considerable status piece here, it still changed things, right? So think about how, when I am in with a team of entrepreneurs, how do I lower my status? And then when I go to the executive committee, how do I raise my status, right? We need to be able to go up and down the status scale at will. If you need help with this, take a course in improv. Okay, so for entrepreneurs, iterate your... Okay, I'm going to do entrepreneurs and managers. For entrepreneurs, iterate your idea. You guys know all about that. I won't dwell on it. Create the rapid prototypes, and so forth. Cultivate sponsors. And remember that you need not only your core team, but a whole bunch of people out there in the organization who are helping you with little pieces of it. And you want to make them feel that they have ownership in this thing too, and that they're part of the people that you care about. So that's some quick advice for entrepreneurs. I've been giving it all along. So I want to talk about managers. We talked about talking about the kinds of innovation. Give direction by asking questions. You've heard all about that today. Train your entrepreneurs. And I'll just tell one story and get out of here because I'm over time. We did recently, I told you about how it doesn't go right with just asking for ideas. You want ideas with people who are willing to implement them. And what we have done very successfully many times is created a training course for entrepreneurs, but to get into it, you have to have a team of people clustered around an idea. We're not going to help you form that team. If you don't have the leadership ability to get some other people excited about your ideas, you don't get into the course. So you screen a lot of people out that way. And And then you don't have to make a decision about them because you're making a tiny investment in them to just train them a little bit. And you put them through an accelerator, and now you have a business plan where you can actually say, well, they've given it their best shot. And the last time we did that, we got a 10-to-1 return within the first year. And so getting bottom-up ideas to go. Anyway, I'm done.